care, at the main gate of Fort Vance, was a cold, blustery thing, carrying the scent of pine and wet asphalt. Corporal Miller, a young man with a jawline as sharp as his buzz cut, stood at attention, his posture a testament to months of rigorous training. His rifle was slung across his chest, and his eyes, trained on the steady stream of vehicles, were sharp and observant. Beside him, Private First Class Rodriguez, a new recruit still getting used to the weight of his gear and the chill of the morning air, shifted his feet nervously. The gate was a bottleneck, a choke point between the civilian world and the heavily guarded, self-contained world of the military base. For the two young soldiers, it was a test of vigilance, a constant reminder of their duty to protect. The line of cars moved slowly, a predictable parade of family sedans, delivery trucks, and official-looking vehicles. Miller was a professional, his voice a crisp, practiced cadence as he verified IDs and waved cars through. Rodriguez, still learning the ropes, was a little more tentative, his hand hovering over the clipboard as he double-checked every name against the list of authorized personnel. It was a routine, a rhythm of stop and go, until a car unlike the others pulled up to the checkpoint. It was an old, beat-up hatchback, its paint a faded shade of blue, its body peppered with small dents and rust spots. The engine coughed and sputtered, a wheezing sound that drew a small chuckle from Miller. The driver's side window rolled down with a slow, grinding noise, revealing a young woman with a face that looked both exhausted and determined. Her hair, a deep brunette, was tied back in a messy bun, and she wore a plain, gray hoodie that looked several sizes too big for her slender frame. She had a thermos clutched in one hand and a look of deep, abiding wariness in her eyes. "Ma'am, ID and pass, please," Miller said, his voice dropping to a serious, non-nonsense tone. The woman fumbled for a moment, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were operating on a different timeline. She finally produced a worn leather wallet and opened it, pulling out a state-issued driver's license. Miller took it, his eyes scanning the photo and the information. "Jasmine Patel," he read out loud. "And what is your purpose for entering Fort Vance, ma'am?" Jasmine looked at him, her eyes tired but not without a certain steely glint. "I have a delivery for Colonel Davies," she said, her voice a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. Miller's eyebrows shot up. "A delivery? What kind of delivery, ma'am?" "A personal one," she replied, her gaze unwavering. Miller's face hardened. He looked at Rodriguez, a silent signal passing between them. A personal delivery for Colonel Davies, a man known for his strict protocols and a general aversion to unsolicited visitors. It was the oldest trick in the book. A spouse trying to make a surprise visit, a civilian trying to sneak onto the base, or something far more nefarious. Miller had seen it all. "Ma'am, Fort Vance is a restricted access military installation," Miller said, his voice now a low, warning rumble. "I can't let you in without a visitor's pass, a verifiable appointment, or a sponsor to come and get you." "I have a pass," she insisted, her hand reaching for her wallet again. Miller shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your driver's license isn't a valid form of entry. You'll have to pull over to the Visitor Center and wait for an escort." Jasmine's tired look gave way to a flicker of frustration. "I don't have time for that," she said, her voice a little louder now. "The colonel is expecting me." Miller sighed. his patience wearing thin. "Everyone is expecting someone, ma'am. Pull over, or I'll have to call for backup." At this point, Rodriguez, feeling a sudden surge of adrenaline and a desire to prove his mettle, stepped forward. "Hey, listen to the corporal. This isn't a game. You can't just waltz onto a military base because you feel like it." Jasmine's eyes, which had been focused on Miller, now shifted to Rodriguez. She looked at him with an expression that was not angry, but something far more unsettling, look of profound, almost pitying, disappointment. "Son," she said, her voice still a whisper, but with a new, chilling edge to it. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not waltzing anywhere. I'm doing my job. Now let me through." The exchange drew the attention of the other soldiers at the gate, a few of whom had been watching the back and forth with casual amusement. Now, a low murmur of conversation started, the quiet observation turning into a general sense of curiosity. A civilian, a woman no less, was giving Miller a hard time at the gate. It was an unusual and slightly comical sight. Miller, feeling the eyes of his peers on him, stood a little straighter. His pride was on the line. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. Pull over now." Jasmine sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. She reached into the worn wallet once more, but this time, her movements were different, no longer fumbling or hesitant. Her hand moved with a swift, confident purpose. She didn't pull out her driver's license. Instead, she took out a small, laminated card. It was not a visitor's pass. It was not a military ID. It was something else entirely. She held it out to Miller, her face a blank, unreadable mask. Miller took the card, his fingers brushing hers. The card was smooth, cool to the touch. The photograph was of her, but younger, her hair a little shorter, her eyes full of a youthful, earnest energy. Below her photo, in crisp, official lettering, were two words that made the blood drain from Miller's face and the color from his knuckles. Rodriguez, who had been standing a step behind Miller, leaned forward to see the card. He saw the same words. He saw the official Navy SEAL insignia, the trident, a symbol so revered, so exclusive, that it was almost mythical. His mouth fell open, and his eyes went from the card to the woman, now a figure of immense, almost terrifying power in his mind. A collective gasp swept through the other soldiers at the gate. The easy laughter, the casual conversation, the low murmurs, it all stopped in an instant. The air grew thick with a new, profound kind of silence. A silence born of awe, shock, and a dawning sense of terror. The commander of Fort Vance, a man named Colonel Davies, was a legend in his own right. A decorated veteran of multiple conflicts, he was a man who commanded respect through a lifetime of service. But even he paled in comparison to the figures who wore the trident. See, the Navy SEALs were a different kind of soldier, a different kind of human. And this tired-looking woman in a beat-up car was one of them. She was a woman who had seen things, done things, that most soldiers could only dream of. And they, two young, untested recruits, had just tried to block her from entering the base. "It's a personal delivery," Jasmine repeated, her voice no longer a whisper, but a quiet, commanding statement of fact. "For Colonel Davies. Now, Corporal, are you going to let me through, or am I going to have to make a call?" Miller, his face a mask of mortified apology, stammered, "No, ma'am. Please, Commander. My apologies. I had no idea. You are cleared for entry." He snapped to a crisp, perfect attention, his hand flying to his brow in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. Rodriguez, his eyes still wide, mirrored the movement, his body a rigid column of terror and respect. Jasmine gave them a small, weary nod. "Thank you, gentlemen," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Just doing my job." She put her car in gear, and the sputtering engine coughed to life. Miller and Rodriguez, still standing at attention, watched as she drove past them, a figure of silent, unassuming power. They watched as she drove into the heart of the base, a legend in a beat-up car, a ghost in the machine. The moment she was out of sight, Miller's posture crumbled. He leaned against the guard shack, his body trembling slightly. "Did you see that?" he whispered to Rodriguez, his voice full of a stunned disbelief. "Did you see that on her card? Commander, SEAL Team 5. Rodriguez just shook his head, his mouth still open. I thought SEALs were bigger," he stammered, the absurdity of his thought hanging in the air. "That's the whole point, you idiot," Miller said, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "They're not supposed to look like anything. They're ghosts. They're shadows. They're the people you don't see until it's too late." The story spread through the base like wildfire. The tale of the two young soldiers who had tried to block a Navy SEAL from entering the base became an instant legend. The soldiers who had laughed at the sputtering car now spoke of the event with a new, profound respect. The tired-looking woman in the gray hoodie was now a mythical figure, a living testament to the fact that you never truly know who you're dealing with. Jasmine, for her part, was oblivious to the legend she had created. She drove to the colonel's office, a long, quiet drive through the bustling base. She navigated the maze of barracks, training facilities, and administrative buildings with an effortless grace that belied her simple appearance. She knew this base, every inch of it, from her years of service. It was a place she had called home for a long, long time. She finally pulled up to a small, unassuming building, parked her car, and walked up to the front door. She didn't knock. She simply opened it and walked inside. The colonel, a man whose face was a roadmap of a lifetime of military service, looked up from his desk. His face, usually a mask of stern authority, softened into a look of profound paternal warmth. "Jasmine," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "You're here." "I'm here, Dad," she replied, her face finally relaxing, a genuine, loving smile gracing her lips. "I brought you a thermos of coffee, and a personal delivery." She held up a small, worn, leather-bound book, a photo album. "I finished the album for Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Colonel Davies stood up, his face a mix of pride and grief. "Ka." He walked over to her and wrapped his arms around her, a tight embrace that spoke of years of shared memories, of quiet understanding, of love, and of loss. For years, the colonel's wife had been the heart of the base, a woman who had given her life to a series of charity programs, support groups, and community outreach. She had been a constant source of warmth and kindness in a world that often valued cold, hard discipline. Her death a few months ago had left a gaping hole in the Fort Vance community, a silence that everyone felt but no one talked about. Jasmine had been deployed when her mother passed. She had received a call in the middle of a mission, a brief, sterile message that had left her with a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound. She hadn't been able to come home for the funeral. She had been on a special assignment, a long, arduous mission in a hostile territory, mission that had taken her to the very edge of her endurance, both physical and mental. Now, she was home. But she wasn't just a soldier. She was a daughter, a grieving child, a woman who had come back from a war zone to a world that had changed forever. She had brought with her not just a thermos of coffee and a photo album, but the weight of a lifetime of service and the quiet, crushing grief of a daughter who had lost her mother. Colonel Davies took the album from her, his fingers tracing the worn leather. He looked at the pictures, at the smiling faces of his wife, at the memories of a life they had built together. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. "Thank you, honey," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Jasmine just nodded, her eyes full of a similar unshed sorrow. She had done her job. She had delivered her cargo. She had completed her mission. Now, she was just a daughter, home from a long, long deployment, ready to mourn her mother, and to heal her own wounds. The story of the young soldiers at the gate became a metaphor for the entire base. The story was not just about the woman who had surprised them with her ID. It was a story about the hidden truths that lie beneath the surface, about the quiet strength of the people you don't see, about the human stories that lie beneath the uniforms and the ranks. It was a story about the fact that a soldier's identity is not just defined by their service, but by their humanity. And sometimes, the most important missions are the ones that take you home. The two young soldiers, Miller and Rodriguez, never forgot the lesson. They learned to look beyond the surface, to see the person in the car, not just the car itself. They learned to respect not just the rank, but the quiet, unassuming strength that came with it. The woman in the gray hoodie had not just shown them her ID. She had shown them a glimpse into a world they had never known. A world where the most powerful people were often the most humble, and the most important missions were often the most personal.